Yes, we have our partners from the social media influencers team, partners from Civic Space TV, my colleagues from the Center for Constitutional Governance, ladies and gentlemen. You're welcome to this first quarter finals debate for the Inter-University's second season. Matanda has just shared the experience of outcomes of the first season that we conducted in 25 universities from 2013 to 2017. Yes. They also have a chief alumni, I think. Angela. Angela, who is the head of legal at the Center for Constitutional Governance, is also an alumni of this inter-university interface debates, season 1. The same apply. Damien, did we? No, Damien, no. No, Damien survived because, yes, he's the one who launched the program and is still spearheading it 10 years down the road. So you're welcome. It's a mentorship journey. It's not just a competition. You will forever interact with CCG programs once you have interacted with us. So for us, it's a long mentorship journey of the students' movement in Uganda, of youth leaders, of a new generation of leaders of this country. It's a non-partisan program, and everybody's welcome to interface and interact with us as we promote constitutionalism in Uganda. The debate for the day is critical at the moment, the shrinking civic space in Uganda. As we stand here today, 54 NGOs are under suspension, under unclear circumstances that are going to end up in a court challenge because of not following due process or observing the principle of rule of law that governs the regulation of NGOs in this country. We chose to first go the dialogue way, but if we do not get results in 1 or 2 weeks, Center for Constitutional Governance, together with the 2 other organizations, we are heading to court over that suspension of our colleagues, even when CCG is not directly affected. In the defense of civic space, you do not have to be a victim of challenges that close or shrink our space. We have to collectively secure these spaces because they are meant for citizens to engage and participate in their governance. I do not want to divulge more details on the topic because we are here to learn from you as gallant students from marketplaces of ideas on your understanding of the challenge of the day in Uganda in terms of governance, the challenge of shrinking civic space. With these few remarks, I will briefly introduce our panel of judges, starting with the Afande Luko Esjile, who is the deputy spokesperson for Kampala Metropolitan. We work closely with him on civic space issues. Council Avoneka Michael, working with ActionAid Uganda. And then the chief, I don't know how to describe you, Isabella, sometimes. Madame Isabella Ktengo wears so many hats. She's a chief Ugandan. She became a very senior facilitator in the CSO sector as a very young person. At times we forget that we are many years older than her. She's closer to your age. I think she's 31 years. Yes, but she has been a facilitator in this sector. No, it's an amazing, and we need to say it to inspire young people that you do not have to wait for 30 to take your stage at the national level. And that's why we are in this program. With these few remarks, I officially open this dialogue, this debate.
1 week. You will sing a new song. 2 days, listen and you will hear. Congratulations, you're a sinner in the glory of God. Congratulations, He has done it for you. Yes, welcome to the first quarterfinal of our inter-university debate interface. The program has already started. We had introduction and briefing from Mr. Demian, and we had official opening from the Executive Director of Center for Constitutional Governance. At this moment, we are going to have our anthems. We have a student who is ready to lead us in the national anthem.
Robert from Uganda University.
Robert, you're welcome.
You have the honors of leading us the anthem today.
Thank you.
So we shall all rise up as we have the anthem.
Thank you so much. Shall we be attentive for the anthem? Oh, Uganda, may God uphold thee.
We lay our future in thy hand. United free for liberty, together we'll always stand. Uganda, land of freedom, our love and labor we give. And with noise born as the country's calling, peace and friendship we live. For Uganda, the land that feeds us by sun and fertile soils grow. For our own dear land, we shall always stand up, follow Africa's crown.
Thank you. You can take your seats.
Thank you very much, Robert from Uganda University. You deserve the round of applause.
Thank you. As earlier, I welcome you to the first quarterfinal for the inter-university debate interface. This debate preparation started weeks ago, and today we have the first quarterfinal for this group. I'm going to be moderating today. My name is Lakay Gender Fancy. I'm an advocate, a tax consultant, and a lecturer at Gulu University. I'll be moderating with my colleague, Godwin Toko. Yes, thank you. So, we have had weeks of preparation for this debate. This is the first quarterfinal. We have 4 universities today. We have Bugema University, Kabale University, Kampala University, and Makerere University. Out of these 4 universities, today 1 university will progress to the semi-final. Are you going to be that university that is going to progress to the semi-final? That will be determined today. So I'm going to welcome my colleague, Godwin Toko, to introduce the panelists and welcome them, and also to introduce, I think our judges were introduced already earlier, so he's going to introduce the panelists, and I'll come back to give you the debate rules. Thank you.
Okay, without wasting a second, let's have Mr. Serumaga Badru joining us from Uganda University. Shall clap and From Makerere University, we shall have Mr. Mayanja Benson. Ladies and gentlemen, these gentlemen represent the 4 universities that participated in the previous debate, and now we are here for the first round of the semi-finals. They will speak when their time comes, and in the order they came. That's the order that we shall use when it comes to them speaking. But before that, we shall have the rules for this engagement, and they'll be read to us by Fancy.
Thank you so much, Toko. So, first of all, the first rule for today is that we are going to keep our phones on silent. This debate is live on Civic Space TV, so we wouldn't want interruption, so kindly put your phone on silent. Speaking rights will only be authorized by the moderators. So the 2 of us, we will authorize speaking rights. So you're not allowed to speak unless we give you that right. Then each of the university students will raise their placard when they want to contribute. So when we come to the phase of student interaction, for you to be able to interact, you will raise your placard. Points of information will also be authorized by the moderators. Now, our panelists are going to speak for 5 minutes each. The first 2 minutes are protected. That means you cannot raise points of information in the first 2 minutes. After that, the next minute, you can raise point of information for the next 2 minutes. And then in the last 1 minute, that 1 minute is also protected. You cannot raise points of information. So please get that clear. And points of information will only come from the panelists. So points of information will come from the panelists. Audience will have your time later on to interrupt. Now, so the students, the audience, who are in the audience, you will later on interact for 30 minutes. But before that, our panelists will have their 5 minutes. After that, they are going to answer questions from the moderators. We are going to direct questions to them, which they will answer. And then the audience will come later on. After the audience interaction, our panelists will come back again to give us their closing remarks in 2 minutes each. So our debate starts now. We are going to be timed by Mr. Matanda. Mr. Matanda is our timekeeper, so I would like to ask the panelists and the audience as well to pay attention to our time manager, Mr. Matanda. He's going to signal when you've used your first 2 minutes for you to know that, yes, so that is going to be the signal after the first 2 minutes, for you to know that your protected time is over, so points of information now will come from the panelists. Then after 2 minutes again, that is in your 4th minute, is going to signal again, yes, for you to know that points of information are now barred. You will be entering your last 1 minute, which is also protected, where points of information are not allowed. So this is a very interactive session, so I kindly request the audience to pay attention so that during audience interaction, you're able to interact with our panelists. So let me welcome back Mr. Toko to invite our panelists so that our debate can kickstart. May the best team win. Thank you.
Indeed, may the best team win. But the first team is Bugema University. Mr. Badu Serumaga, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much.
Make your presentation. Just move forward.
Our major theme is the state of the civic space in Uganda, which to my submission I think is a very pertinent issue that we have to deal with. Prior to that theme, thank you so much. Prior to that theme, it has an extra question which goes as, how does the shrinking civic space affect universities as a marketplace for ideas. Thank you very much. Digging deep into the history of this topic, as per our discussion today, the civic space permit me to begin by giving a brief history about what this all about is. Attempts to squeeze it actually haven't just come up, but the trend is right from 70s, 50s, 60s, sometimes back when most of us had actually not been brought to this earth. It ranged right from organizations for, let me say, contextualizing for the case of Uganda, time back when Ike Musas, by now he's late, and Kivu, initiated the need to begin the Drivers Association. However, Uganda being an agrarian country, basically we base our earnings on agriculture. Agriculture became the major item that was bringing about togetherness and a sense of nationalism in people, because that's where the biggest focus was, and people only met to discuss pertinent issues, having come together, brought about by agriculture. Time to come, a need came. And as per this matter, because of this need, the crisis arose, and industrialization drove in. Because of this industrialization, organizations began getting into place, and it is these organizations that changed systems from government-led to market-led. People involved in actively participating. It resulted in the birth of NGOs, market-led organizations, that once turned into political grounds, and it was because of this that trade unions, agrarian foundations, and other bodies that began participating in the political arena. Little did we know that the by then ruling people of ours would turn it into a political threat, only to begin violating what it really has to do for us. It was a necessity for these people to contribute to their political arena, because as per a civil society, people have to freely contribute to governance, decision making, influence, and any issues pertaining to democratic right and fundamental human rights. How then these rights get into the shrinking space?
Can I engage? Okay, thank you very much. It's undoubtedly true that the history of NGOs is interesting, but I think you're skipping a very important period within which the NGOs manifested beyond what the governments were doing. Why are we having this conversation on NGOs without the inclusion of government, if government at the time was intending to help civilians?
Yes, thank you. I remind myself about when I said that because the government had lost control over these organizations that were led by it. In fact, it lost control because by 1961, from 1951, from the 250 civil society organizations, it had highly escalated, and there were over 39,000 organizations. So should I say the government lost contact? Yes, the government lost control because very many of the things were being influenced by the people, and indeed need be, because that was a necessity of the trade unions and other fundamental rights organizations that were meant really to fight for the good. Thank you very much. To my continuity, it is more of a democratic sphere that we really have to admit and submit that the biggest problem is not within the universities, but it comes from the topmost. How then does it come from the topmost? If government denies all the necessities, for instance, in this context, they are the right that we have to pertain to. Thank you, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Serumaga. I have been reminded, and I will have to apologize to you first and foremost, that you shouldn't have gone down. It's supposed to be like a president sitting right there and talking. So going forward, that's what we are going to do. I hope you accept my apologies. So starting with Mr. Amanya Oscar, you will just stay up where you are and then make your presentation. If you've forgotten, Mr. Amanya Oscar joins us from Comparative University. Mr. Amanya Oscar, make your submission.
Thank you, dear moderator of tonight. As earlier said, my name is Oscar Manya from Kavala University. Ladies and gentlemen, today we join here to discuss a very pertinent issue about the state of the civic space in Uganda and how exactly this space is shrinking and how this shrinkage is actually affecting universities as a marketplace of ideas. First and foremost, we need to look at the definition of civic space. Civic space is generally something that relates to the freedom of association, freedom of assembly, freedom of access to free flow of information, and human rights and rule of law, inclusion, and being non-discriminatory. Now, when we look at the civic space, we need, now knowing what the civic space is, we should look at exactly how is this space getting shrunk in Uganda? In actual context, is it really getting shrunk or it is not? And personally, I will say that the civic space is shrinking as regards to the rights I've talked about. I will go straight forward to why do I think that the civic space is shrinking. Ladies and gentlemen, in the introductory remarks, we heard about the closure of the 54 CSOs, which are undergrounds that are unconfirmed and unsatisfactory. Basically, if you are closing civil society organizations, which have been providing civic education, have been providing funding to the communities like the communities in the university, it automatically means that the civic space is shrinking. Then we look at the current legislations put in place by the government, including the Public Order Management Act of 2013, the Computer Misuse Act, which in most cases have been used to infringe on the civic space of the activists and some other people who are trying to get engaged in the civic space and actually expressing their rights or enjoying their rights in terms of freedom of association, assembly, and expression. We also go to look at the intervention of the security, especially when it comes to the maybe people trying to express themselves, or they are demonstrating, or they are striking, especially now to the university question. Most people who have been engaged at the universities, when students are having some challenges raised, there is excessive force that is used by the security, and sometimes this causes fear to the other students. It means basically that the students who have had a chance of coming and participating in such activities get the fear and end up also not taking up the activism role. Then we also look at the kind of taxes, for example, the internet tax. In the face of the pandemic, where the virtual spaces are now replacing the physical spaces, where we cannot have the physical spaces, like right now, we are gathered here, but we are to a limited number. So basically, where do you think these spaces should sit? Automatically to the virtual spaces. And now, if there is an internet tax, of recent 12% tax was put on internet data, there has been the over-the-top tax. All those affect what we call the virtual spaces that would have been in place instead of the physical spaces, especially in the period of the pandemic. Ladies and gentlemen, this means that actually the civic space is shrinking. And now we get to the question of today. How does this affect the universities as a marketplace of ideas? Ladies and gentlemen, a marketplace of ideas means where people go and exchange ideas and knowledge. And a university should be that place. Now, when you look at the university's context, we need to know that the university gets people from somewhere, from the society. So we need to look at who gets in, and then what exactly happens within. The spaces within the universities, and then who gets out. As I've told you, that the society itself is learning from the interference I've talked about from the state to fear the activism roles. And now if it is fearing the activism roles, it means that people who are actually getting in do not feel free to share the ideas, and it means that the marketplaces of ideas are not getting real done. Then, what exactly is happening within the universities? The spaces that has been happening in universities have been funded, most of them by the CSOs. But when we see such CSOs being closed, it automatically means that there is a direct effect on the spaces within the universities themselves. So the ideas will not be exchanged in that context. And now we look at what goes out of the university. The people that are going out of the university are the people who have lost the activism track, and that's what my comrade Matanda was talking about, that there is a generation challenge. There is a question we need to ask ourselves. If people are getting out with fear and not participating in the activism roles, it automatically means that the ideas and the exchange of basically the knowledge about the freedom of expression, the freedom of assembly, and all the rights regarding civic space will actually be limited. With those, I beg to submit. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Amanya Oscar. From Kabale University, we shall move back to Kampala and have someone from Kampala University. And that's Mr. Ndaga Farouk.
Thank you so much, my dear moderator. My name is Ndaga Farouk from Kampala University, and I'm hereby to exhaust what is all about this theme. The state of civic space in Uganda. How does the shrinking civic space affect the universities as the marketplaces for ideas? Ladies and gentlemen, first of all, we need to know what is civic space. And this is set by a set of rules that grants people to associate, to relate, to exercise their freedoms of right, freedom of speech, and all that. And by doing so, they are influencing the political and social and economic factors of life or spheres in their respective locations. So when I say shrinking civic space, from this context, I'm meaning that the civic space the nation has been exercising. In other words, because remember, Article 71 of the UN Charter as amended in 1945, plus Article 29 of the National Constitution amended in 1995. It grants, first of all, the UN Charter, Article 71, it grants the existence of the NGO, which sponsors with the youth in respective universities to exercise, to implement, to create awareness amongst the youth on how things are being done in sense of constitutional order and governance. But when there is shrinking civic space, it means that there is eradication of the bodies that ensure the rule of law, the democratic governance, and all that. So, with the constitutional grounds, we are going against the tendencies that have been implemented by the authoritative offices. Let's say the security agencies, the government. And these are shrinking space. They have been enacted by the emergence of the government or the state in the leadership of the and the government has included itself in the leadership of respective universities. For example, the government has enacted what we call patriotism club. But when it is in veil, it is this club that brings people, students on board in the name of a body of WUNSA, of which we know that WUNSA is an NRM agenda, which is not implementing sorts of nationalism and the like.
Just a second.
Yes.
Shall have him and then.
Okay, thank you, Honorable. You're talking about UNSA being an agenda for the ruling government. Do we think that UNSA itself and then the patriotism clubs are not part of the clubs that offer space for the students?
Thank you. I've got you straight away. Now, UNSA, it is a body that is dictated by the state. That's why President Museveni is the patron of this club. Secondly, UNSA is always driven by NRM agenda, though it is said to have implemented nationalism, but when in a real sense, it is not. Because when you go in UNSA, you are not mandated to speak what you are supposed to. So that leads to shrinking space. Thank you.
sorted out with the technology, not theology. For the case of Uganda, does it really apply? Is it really necessary for us to apply laws in the UN Charter rather than Ugandan laws?
First and foremost, in the beginning I said, because before we amended the Constitution of 1995, the UN Charter was first implemented. So it is the UN Charter where we derived the implementation of the law upon the existence of the NGOs in 1995. So from there, we cannot have the 1995 Article 29 without the 71 article of the UN Charter. So as I was still submitting, I was saying, with all of this, the imprisonment of the journalists, the activists, the students who peacefully demonstrate, and the government.
Thank you very much, Farouk, for your submission. We are now going to move to our final panelist of the day, and that is going to be Mr. Mayanja Benson, joining us all the way from Makerere University.
Okay, thank you.
Just mention your name for the judges.
Thank you very much. My name is Benson C. Mayanja. C is an initial for Conrad. I am very privileged to be here this evening to have a very important discussion on the civil space and how it's affecting the university. So firstly, I have to commend my comrades for making a very good introduction on some of the very important issues when it comes to dealing with civil space. The ideas of human rights are definitely synonymous with understanding what civil space is. But the challenge that I particularly find with most of the submission that has been made is that there's been a gap that has been left in regard to how civic space is shrinking. It's not entirely that the promulgation of a law in itself means that a civil space is going to be clamped down. Because even with the COVID-19 and 200 people maximum, we're still able to have this conversation. We're still able to have YouTube disseminate most of the information that we have. So I think also a very important aspect is to look at some of the internal structures that make civil organizing models. We must understand that as a developing country, we suffer a lot when it comes to finances. And that specific challenge goes right away to where we get our money to run most of these activities. So in the wake of the 2008 financial crisis that hit the world, you have to realize that things such as supplementary structural adjustment programs came in. That's when they started to bite us hard. And that made it very hard for us to get money to run most of these things. So I don't think that merely because we have a Public Order Management Act, I understand that a few sections of it were repealed, but it's really an injustice to the argument of limitation of rights to say that all rights are absolute, which my brothers, I would like to say, is not. That's why we have limitations on certain rights. But then, furthermore, looking at why I would say the argument in regard to why the state is doing most of what it is doing is because even from the inception of civil societies, the biggest challenge that we had was the fact that these civil societies were advancing what we now call the democracy agenda or the democratic governance agenda. What that does to authoritarian governments is that it infringes and threatens their sustainability and livelihood. When you start to equip citizens with the information on voting, yeah, I'll take you. Yeah.
For example, they report to 7 offices where they are meant to prove the right. For example,
I agree. I agree with you entirely. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. I'm saying that for the purposes of having a genuine and honest conversation, we shouldn't entirely spite the government for the structures that it's putting in place. I agree. I definitely agree that there are challenges in the system. But for one to argue that ultimately all these laws and structures that are being made is really an injustice to the quality of conversation that we need to be having when it comes to issues on human rights. And that's the point that I'm trying to make. So I agree with you entirely, my brother, that we're having challenges. But I don't think it's something that we should ultimately say is the concern of the government. And that's what's taking me to the next point, that universities as think tanks, in its essence, and very many professors have written about this kind of discussion, that universities need to take a different pedagogical style to how they teach people at university. It's not about giving us notes. It's not about telling us to go and read this book. It's all about researching and creating an independent think tank for the country to thrive. That's why you look at countries such as Norway, where the prime minister gives 1.7 billion shillings to an institute for research to be able to go and, think about how they can improve their government. And that's where the biggest challenge for me is when it comes to the thinking space. Yes, I'll take you.
Now, when you talk about the pedagogical content taught in the university, and you're talking about that the state interference might not be the same in the university, and the pedagogical content is determined by the National Council for Higher Education, do you probably think that these pedagogical engagements, if they are against the authoritarian government and
True. Actually, that's my next point. My point is that the challenge that we have with the shrinking space is the challenge that we get with a human rights-based approach to education. Now, the Consortium for Corporate Accountability has made this argument in regard to business. The only reason as to why we have a cafe such as this one paying the employees as much as they pay is because there's a certain human rights-based approach to which they pay their employees, to which they conduct their activities. Now, when it comes to education and specifically universities, the fact that we can no longer engage with, like DGF in the activities that it intends to promulgate maybe through law school or through any other institution is the challenge we get. So that argument is different from what my brothers were saying, because for them, I think it's more or less about, we're not getting participation. We're looking at specifically the approach that we have when it comes to learning human rights. And the Makerere Law Society has endeavored to do this through the External Correspondence Initiative. If I'm just given 5 seconds to complete that statement. Thank you very much. What the Makerere Law Society does is that it takes out conversations to different colleges to teach them the human rights aspect to their course. You're studying business, understand the human rights within business. You're studying medicine, understand medical negligence that happens. And that's the challenge we get with the shrinking space. Thank you very much.
Can we please clap for our panelists? Thank you so much. That was the main debate that we had for 5 minutes for each of our panelists under the topic, the state of civic space in Uganda. How does a shrinking civic space context affect universities as marketplaces for ideas? And I think our panelists have done justice to that topic. We really appreciate. So I would like to remind you that for those who are on Twitter, please, the hashtag is Inter-University Debates and hashtag Civic Space TV, and we are also live on Civic Space TV on YouTube. Now we are entering into the second phase of the debate, the question session. So our panelists, I hope you're ready. So we will be directing questions to our panelists, and you will have 3 minutes each to respond to the question. My first question will go to Bugema University, and that is Mr. Serumaga Badru. My question is, how does shrinking civic space in Uganda affect students' participation in their government, both in universities and at national level? I think I'll repeat that question. How does, because from your different speeches we have heard you all agreed that the space is shrinking. So the question is, how does this shrinking civic space in Uganda affect students' participation in their government, both in universities and at national level? You have 3 minutes to respond to this question. Thank you.
Thank you very much. At the university level, I beg to submit by giving an example of my own. Seriously, my university is a 70-day affiliated institution of higher learning, and it only provides grounds for 70-day Adventists to contest for good presidency. What do I mean here? I, who comes from the Muslim community, I hold no chance to lead, much as I may be having tactics and skills of governance. I get no opportunity to participate in leadership. Now it means I shall not even have a right and a chance to contribute to the national issues based from my university. And in a way that it affects students in their participation to national issues, I'll give an example of my comrades that have graduated from Makere. I'll give an example of Dr. Olalo Tunu. I'll give an example of Madame Anne. She has done some lawyering and she has been a legislator at the parliament. Yes, they have graduated, but once they go out to portray out what they have studied from universities, we go to learn and unlearn something. If I've gone to study economics, I shouldn't only get assimilated to policies governing the economy. I have to get informed about the rest of the world.
Badru, just move the microphone closer to your mouth.
Why then do they have to be silenced when they're informing about when they're informing people about really what they have to do? Someone stands for a political seat, and that person is designed with charges that he really doesn't hold. It won't be of necessity for me to table facts, but this has been a common phenomenon in the country. And hence they don't have any chance of revealing out what they have learned from their universities beneath what their major area of concentration was. I beg to submit.
Okay, thank you very much. I will ask Mr. Amanya next. Mr. Amanya. Is civic space in Uganda shrinking or is it changing, and why?
First of all, the civic space in Uganda is shrinking, and the shrinking basically means that it is changing. The other time it was a little bit wide, and it is getting more shrunk. Why do I say this? When we were having 54 CSOs in operation, CSOs like Chapter 4 Uganda, even when we had the democratic governance facility, these CSOs were running activities that have increased, that were increasing civic education, civil participation, and the fight for the human rights. For example, Chapter 4 Uganda was offering legal aid to the people who were not having legal, like money for legal fees. That automatically means that at least some time back we were somewhere. Right now we are in another place, but that place is kind of shrunk. So there has been change, and the change to shrinking, not expanding. And I basically think that is not the right change to go. Thank you.
Yeah, Oscar. I would like to direct my question to Mr. Daga Farouk from Kampala University. The question is, in the global context, how disadvantaged are Ugandan students in comparison with students from other countries in terms of civic competencies?
Okay, thank you so much. So now your question is to be addressed in such a manner that we should compare the civic space of the entire globe in comparison, especially with Uganda. Now we can see that on the other side of the coin, globally, there is no indulgence of the government in the administration of different universities, away from what we can see in Uganda, that Ugandan students in different universities, remember, universities are thinking tanks, of which we study to think, not to remember. That's why university students are able to go in the field for transformative changes and the like. But now, if there is no shrinking space in comparison, then we suffer the consequences that shall remind us of the quote. I can give you that the most powerful tool in the course of suppression or oppression is the mind of the oppressed. Now, should you compare, it's like we are on another earth. For us, the students who are in Uganda. Now we can see that there is democratic tendencies in different universities in other countries. There is the rule of law. There is no actual shrinking civic space, if any, they are literally low. So, madam, I can't compare Uganda to other students in the context of civic space. I beg to submit.
Thank you. I'll move to Mr. Mayanja and ask him the very same question. Mr. Mayanja, in the global context, how disadvantaged are Ugandan students in comparison with students from other countries in terms of civic competence? Your microphone is working, so you don't have to use that.
All right. Thank you very, very much. I think the two major concerns to first understand with your question. Firstly is what a human rights understanding is in regard to the global arena. There have been arguments by Professor Lumumba PLO that most of what we understand human rights to be is a Eurocentric understanding, because the point at which we got human rights was initially from what we know as the European countries, outside countries. And I think that's why it's very hard to make that comparison, as my brother Farouk is saying, because the understanding of human rights in Africa per se is not merely the same as that in abroad. That's why we have countries out there that impose upon us standards of governance, what democracy is. If I asked an African what democracy is, or per se in Uganda, what is democracy? There's a bit of a challenge to understand that, because we didn't necessarily go through the French Revolution, we didn't necessarily go through Napoleonic Wars to understand where exactly we get to know what the right to life is, or why we need to have a distinction between marginalized groups. So I would think that firstly, the understanding is different. And I would say that we are disadvantaged because we haven't yet found a model that is befitting of African countries. That's why when we have a certain culture that is inimical to us, as that is the ethos of our communities, it is labeled as a human rights violation. Things such as bride price, and I'm not making an argument for bride price, I'm just saying that there are certain things that are unique to African cultures that are being imposed upon us by Eurocentric understanding. So as African students, we have that specific challenge of failing to understand the fine line between what human rights in Africa should be and what it is being imposed upon us. But I think that generally answering your question, and if I have maybe say about 30 seconds to still respond to it, is that we have a very huge challenge, and that's why the civic space is very important for us to get that appreciation at a higher level of studying, to be able to make that distinction and know where we are heading to, and why it's important for us to know human rights the way we should know them. And that's why the shrinking civic space is very, very detrimental to think tanks at university, because we then miss out on that opportunity to know what human rights is. And then when we get to positions such as those of our judges, we have challenges implementing human rights-based approaches, because in essence, we don't really know what human rights is.
Mr. Mayanja Benson, I would like to come back to Mr. Serumaga Batu from Bugema University. My question is civic space in Uganda closing or changing? And why?
Yes, thank you, please. The civic space in Uganda is actually closing. It is actually closing because the rationales that we have to be following, rights should be protected, yet even under the POM in their acts, the violation is like they are holding it legit, as if our rights are being violated legally, if I'm to say. I'll be brief as that.
For being brief, sir. Oscar, this is a simple one, I think. What is civic space?
Thank you. As that is a very good question, because particularly that's what we are discussing about here right now. And if you heard very well from my submission, I defined civic space as regards to respect of freedom of association, freedom of peaceful assembly, freedom of access to information and free flow of information, freedom of, inclusion, like something being non-discriminatory when we are implementing policies, or when we are advocating for such policies. And basically, that's what defines a civic space. So in an area where you find that those freedoms are respected, somebody can express themselves, somebody can freely assemble and peacefully, and freedom of association is respected, then basically we say that there is a good civic space. Thank you. I beg to submit.
I would like to direct my question to Mr. Daga Farouk from Kampala University.
Yes.
What are the root causes of shrinking civic space in Uganda?
Thank you. The root causes of shrinking civic space, like earlier I told you, that shrinking civic space are the radical tendencies also implemented by the state against those who are demanding for the order towards the civic space, and like journalists, activists, presidential candidates, more so the presidential candidates, and then the entire students' body. So, to get back to the question, what causes shrinking civic space? It is first of all the indulgence or the inclusion of the government in the universities, the need to practice dictatorship in a country, the need to overstay in power, to put aside the democratic tendencies and then the constitutional grounds. So, all of those factors lead to the shrinking space, because amidst the presence of dictatorship in the country, there shall come bodies that shall go against it. So in the due course, there shall be suppression, unfair arrests, unfair imprisonment, imprisonment without trial, and the like. So, Madam Moderator, for all of that, I think shrinking space is accepted legally, more so from the state. Thank you.
Anya, in your own view, what is the way forward for protection of civic space at the universities and in Uganda generally?
All right, thank you very much. That's a very multifaceted question, because it involves very many actors involved in understanding civic space and how it's protected. I think one of the major tenets of how to fight civic space, first of all, is to really work on our judicial system. You know, the relationship between the judiciary, executive, and legislature is one that is always, and I must say this with ultimate pride, is that it's always served within the judicial system. Because even as the Center for Constitutional Governance prepares a petition in court, whereas it might appear on the face of it that the closure of these NGOs at most was unconstitutional, the judgment that comes from the court is ultimately the decision that will be enforced by the legislature and that by the executive. So I think we really need to work on our judicial system, because the judicial system is what interprets rights. It's what makes certain law to a certain extent. And when our judicial system falls in the pitfalls, like Professor Lokonyango says, when the courts do politics, then that becomes a very huge problem. So perhaps the question that we are answering, at least first of all, is how exactly do we improve our judicial system? And like one of our colleagues was saying, Farouk, is having that appreciation of what international law standards say. What's the international minimum standard? There was an interesting comment the other day by one of our top government officials, name withheld out of due respect. He said that currently denying bail to someone who is arrested is a human right, which is true. Article 28 of the Constitution states that. But if we change the law and make the law say that whoever is denied bail, the murderers shouldn't be given bail, then it's not a violation of human rights. Which is an interesting argument on the face of it, but because there is lack of appreciation of what the international standard holds, that even within our constitution we make an allusion to what international standards should be, that becomes a problem. So we need to really do benchmarking. Pretty much, we need to do benchmarking within countries that we feel are closely affiliated to our situation, to understand how they improve their court systems, how they make the independence of the judiciary very important as a crucial element within how they implement most of these things. And then once you have that, or working side by side, you look at how to improve universities. Like I've said, I have about 1 year, 2 years to leave school, and I guess so as my colleagues. But what's out there for us? How do we go out and then start being the violators of human rights? How do we choose to join, say, for example, the police force, and which has the ultimate obligation to serve and protect? And I am the first person who is shooting to kill in a demonstration without the respect of human rights. So I think that's something that we really need to take into consideration.
Mr. Seruma Gabadru, and it is basically the same question. What is the way forward for the protection of civic space in universities and Uganda in general?
For protecting this shrinking civic space, in other words, how can we squeeze this space? How can we reclaim back this space? There are quite a multitude of solutions that I think, if I got you right, was it about what we can do to reclaim this space back? Yes, should the government adopt mechanisms that really join it to the CSOs and the general society, besides the organizations that run an initiative of protecting these rights, I think there is quite a gap that shall have closed. The government shall be in no position to interpret civil society organizations as grounds for breeding revolutionaries. It means they shall table this issue and they shall reach an agreement. And to the university issue, I think there needs a government involvement in university politics because really some decision-making techniques are really unbecoming, if I'm to say. I missed a chance of asking Mr. Matanda whether even at IU it is only a Muslim who is supposed to lead the government, like it is at my university. But should such loopholes be rectified, I think there is quite a chance for this shrinking civic space to be squeezed, and then to reclaim it back.
Okay, thank you very much. Shall move back to Oscar from Kavala University. Oscar, I'll ask you a question that has been asked already. What are the root causes of shrinking civic space in Uganda?
Thank you. What are the root causes of shrinking civic space in Uganda? First of all, I would like to thank the gentlemen here that we all agree that the civic space is actually increasing. And from my submission, I made it point clear, and I gave about 3 reasons, or 3 root causes of the shrinking civic space. And majorly, most of them were under a general term that I can call state intervention. 1, from under the state intervention, I looked at legislation. My comrade Mayanja came and tried to say maybe it is something lacking in the pedagogical content, but still when asked to give the solution, he had to offer that there is something within the judiciary, and basically to solve the problems within the judiciary, we need to do something about the legislation. So it means that there is some loophole in the legislation. I gave examples of the acts, of the recent acts that are causing or that are giving space for someone to shrink the civic space. And then I also talked about the fear. And this fear is in most young activists. What is stopping student activism in universities basically is the fear. And where do these people get the fear? First of all, they don't have models, and the models they have at the national level are when they engage in activism activities like demonstrations and everything, they get excessively, like force used on them is excessively by the security officials. I talked about that. Then I also talked of the closure of the of the CSOs. These CSOs have been the major funders and the major leaders of civic education and fighting for human rights and protection of all the freedoms that lie under civic space. So basically, the major cause of the shrinking civic space in Uganda, as per now, is majorly state intervention and due to the reasons I gave you. Then I also looked at about the pandemic, because the pandemic has had effects. And the effect was that we shall have to close the physical civic space, which is justifiable because we cannot gather, we cannot congregate. But then there is a solution, and which solution is that? There are the virtual spaces. But still the question comes, why is the space shrinking further, yet there could be virtual spaces? And still the state is introducing a tax like an internet tax in time where we would need the virtual spaces. So basically, the major cause of the shrinking civic space in Uganda as of right now and the current status quo is the state intervention. Thank you.
This question is to Mr. Ndaga Farouk from Kampala University. What is the way forward for the protection of civic space in universities and in Uganda in general?
Thank you so much for such a nice question, because at the end of the day, we have to reach a resolution. Dear ladies and gentlemen, allow me to brief you about what we were told in 1971 by J.F. Kennedy when he said, a society whose young men and women are in a constant state of slumber will never realize their potential until they wake up one day and send a clear message to those in bigger positions of leadership. And in this context, some countries experienced the same situation just like we are doing with the Ugandans. And some peaceful mechanisms have been tried upon, but they have not worked out. Then the question, what is the way forward? This, it will bring up a revolutionary mode in the revolutionary youth and then entire country. So what is the way forward? What should we do to restore civic space? In my own opinion, I think we should eradicate the whole thing, the entire system, because even when we shall be having the NGOs, the civil society organizations, still it shall be the same government to amend the constitution in this favor of the entire society. It shall be the same government that shall amend the constitution in its favor. So what should we do? We should get rid of this government, so just in case it goes dictatorial. Quote me right. Just in case it goes dictatorial, even when we have witnessed such dictatorial tendencies, the deprivation of human rights from the activists, the suppression of students who strikes peacefully, but when they termed to be confronters and alike. For me, I think constitutional order shall be restored. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, sir. We shall now move to Mr. Mayanja from Makerere. Mr. Mayanja, I'll ask you a question that has already been asked. What are the root causes of shrinking civic space in Uganda?
Okay. I think it's rather important to make a concession in this discussion, at least if it's to be as honest as we intend it to be, that there is indeed a looming factor of state intervention, and that's something that we definitely agree to. But I also think that one of the reasons as to why we need to delve away or to delve out of the entire blamist approach towards government is that for populations or populace that continuously blame government for certain things, we normally have that challenge of looking inward intrinsically to sort out some of the errors that we have, systemic errors, poor governance. Because even when you have CSOs that want accountability against corruption, there is some corruption lingering within that organization. So if we don't make the concession that there is a challenge equally within our own systems, then it becomes problematic. So here is what I think the challenge is. The challenge is that we don't have a proper metric of evaluating the impact of civil societies. Let me ask you one very honest question. How do you know that Center for Constitutional Governance is doing something?
How do we know that DGF was doing something? It's not about the money that you impart in universities. There's a certain metric. The Civil Society Index has a very robust outline on how you measure. And one of them is that you need to have participation, which is true. We are now about, say, give or take 100 people in the room. But that doesn't necessarily mean that we've engaged a very huge population. Even if we had 2,000 people watching this show, we won't exactly know that all those people have walked away with the intellectual appreciation of what civil space is. So I think the very huge challenge that we have at the end of the day is the ability of the civil spaces to impact national policy. And that comes with so many things. And of course, like I already said, state intervention is one of them. But I think above everything else, because even before we had them closed, they were operating, how do we gauge and say that this organization was working and this one wasn't? So I think one of the hugest challenges that is being faced with civil societies, even if the government said, operate as you want, the question is, how do they get to impact? So I think the challenge that we have and the major root cause that we have, even besides all these other things, is having that metric of allowing civil society organizations to evaluate themselves. Because you'll inject 5 billion into a campaign, you'll have 5,000 people attending, and you'll have only 300 people going to vote. And even when they vote, they're not voting consciously of what it means. It's because they are given 200 shillings to buy an underwear or something of the sort. So I think that's a very huge challenge, and that's something that we need to be aware of, even outside state intervention. That's something that we really need to look at. It's something that we need to be very aware of, and something that is very crucial to the survival of civil space organizations.
The next question is to Mr. Serumaga Badru from Bugema University. In the global context, how disadvantaged are Ugandan students in comparison with students from other countries in terms of civic competencies?
I'd like to quote you right about this.
I can repeat the question. In the global context, how disadvantaged are Ugandan students in comparison with students from other countries in terms of civic competencies?
Okay, thank you, please. I'll begin my suggestion by some specific statement. Uganda produces what she cannot consume and consumes what she does not produce. It's quite alarming that even at major constructions, we hire engineers from China to come and construct roads, where we have PhD engineers, we have people with masters in engineering and whatever. So to the global arena, Uganda, in the contextual Uganda, we are so disadvantaged because if we are to weigh our competencies in relation to those ones of our colleagues from other countries, really, Uganda is some sort of, I'm talking about this kind of Uganda that refuses chance for civic society organization to claim for the rights of the nationals. In my understanding, sincerely speaking, Uganda might be at war with many of the countries where these organizations originate from. So because even in that very view, we are creating enmity from people who provide us with assistance, at our post-university level, there are less chances of getting jobs. It is my submission. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I'll go to Oscar from Comparative University. Oscar, I'll ask you the same question. In the global context, how disadvantaged are Ugandan students in comparison with students from other universities in terms of civic competence?
Thank you, moderator. First of all, to understand the dynamics of this question, we need to look at the terms used in this question. What exactly are we meaning by civic competencies? By civic competencies, we mean how best is the student or the young people who are getting out of education institutions portraying or participating in what is basically termed as civil rights. how are they participating in freedom of assembly, freedoms of association? How well can they influence social structures and political structures using the civil rights and the freedoms we are talking about under the civic space? So basically, when we talk about the global context, we shouldn't look at the countries that maybe are in some way related to us. We should look at countries where we admire to be. When we say the civic space is shrinking, and we all agree that it is shrinking, we need to look at the other world. It is a global challenge that the space is almost shrinking everywhere because these legislations are made everywhere in China and in whatever. But we need to look at more democratic countries. I think the Ugandan students are at a very big disadvantage because one, if they don't have the civic space, if the civic space is shrunk, it basically means that these people do not have rights to participate. And basically what can they offer? In the global context, an activist from Uganda, a young activist from Uganda cannot be the same as an activist, for example, in the US. For example, when we were the Black Lives Matter movement, I don't think what happened and the influence that the young people tried to cause in America can be caused by the people here, basically because the civic space is different. Now look at Nigeria. Nigeria of recent, there has been something about SARS. I hope you heard of it. Now, what did people do with SARS? The students and the young people went to social media and used hashtag #EndSARS, and they ran a successful campaign that won against what actually the state was infringing on them. But how best can a Ugandan student who cannot access internet, a taxed internet, a taxed social media, can be compared to a Nigerian student? Basically, it means that the Ugandan students are very much disadvantaged and they don't have the civic competence just because they don't have the platform to actually participate in those civic and civil rights. Thank you.
Yeah, Oscar. The next question is to Mr. Ndaga Farouk from Kampala University. Is civic space in Uganda closing or changing, and why?
Thank you. Civic space is not shrinking because shrinking can be the gradual state of extinction. However, closing, it is just an abrupt blockage of something. Now, in Uganda, we are having a closing civic space. And this is because the state is always against anybody that turns to demand for constitutional rights, for constitutional order, and democracy. So, shrinking space, civic space is being closed because of the events that we have witnessed in the due course from 2019 up to date, with the closure of almost 54 NGOs, with the arrest of human rights activists, journalism, brutal and unfair arrests. So, the root cause of this is the hatred of the government towards any who demands for constitutional rights. So, Madam Moderator, sir, sorry, Madam Moderator, we are not experiencing shrinking, but closure. Because there is no hope that there shall be a restoration. There is no hope to whichever that has submitted in the sense of peaceful negotiations and talks. I beg to submit.
Much, sir. I'll move to Mr. Mayanja. Mr. Mayanja, the question that is simple. What is civic space?
Thank you very much. Firstly, let me start by stating that there is actually hope. I don't think the populace in Uganda should become hopeless that there is no remedy for a shrinking space or a closing space. I think that's something that really needs to be out there in the public. Mr. Farouk, I imagine that a very disoriented population can do very tremendously horrible things as well. So yes, that's stated. I think that makes my point. civic space is an environment of hope. It's an environment where people envisage the achievement or enjoyment of certain rights. Now, whereas my brother Amanya has been making the argument in regard to what a civic space is and how it entails certain rights, I don't think that a civic space is, a civic space is delimited to certain specific rights. Whereas there may be some rights that enable, that are complementary to one another, I think that a civic space is an environment where individuals constantly and intentionally work towards enjoying human rights. So you'll recognize why I say that it's, even when we have a distinction in our constitution about fundamental human rights, non-derogable rights, all those rights work together to ensure the enjoyment of others. That's why when it comes to things such as giving someone a death sentence, it's not that you're violating just one human right of theirs. You're violating a multiplicity of them that would definitely not work out. So I think that a civic space is an environment that then has very many actors. And your question was really about description. So it has very many actors. It has the state, it has individuals, and for a country like ours, Uganda, which has about 77% of its population as youth, requires youth activism. So it's something that we really need to look at from a very broader context as opposed to delimiting it to a few rights, because then I would say things such as the right to a clean and healthy environment is equally an opportunity for someone to enjoy a civic space. And the National Environment for Environmental Management Authority has made this very clear, and so have the courts. So I think that civic space is really that environment where we have an active engagement towards achieving human rights and that is ancillary to it.
For answering the questions, let us clap for our panelists. Our panelists did justice to the questions. It's time to switch to our audience. I hope you were listening. We agreed at the beginning that we will be paying attention to our panelists. So now we are switching to the audience. If you want to speak, please raise your placard. You'll be picked, and then you will submit in 2 minutes. Please keep your submission to 2 minutes.
Okay, we shall begin right here with Bugema University.
Thank you so much. My name is Prosperous from Bugema University. I had supplements, inquiries, and disagreements, and I would like to begin with supplements. I would like to supplement on Mr. Badru's submissions that the civic space in Uganda is shrinking or closing, and I would say that this is a debate, and therefore we could say that the civic space is either protected, restricted, partially restricted, and then non-existing. By the fact that we are here, we cannot say that it is closing. No, we should say that it is partially restricted because we are associating here and we're having an engagement with a police officer here. So this is a fact that indeed it is there, but other dimensions like freedom of association and speech, rule of law, human rights, it's the problem that we could be having. When it comes to questions, Mr. Oscar Amanya, you had most of your discussions concerning CSOs and their closure. I would like to ask you, we well know that in this country, all organizations and other people, we respect the laws of the land. I expect that you know the NGOs Act and regulations of the NGOs. Please, will you go further and you enlighten to us why did these CSOs close? And do you think that the government was wrong to close them according to the reasons that the government gave? I beg for one minute to finish. Thank you so much. My disagreement goes to Mr. Benson. I also have a question for you. What do you think should be done to improve civic space in universities? Because your arguments were more of legislature, no, judiciary. I don't know, maybe you may be a lawyer, and I'm a medical student, but you educate me more on that. You said that strengthening the judicial system can improve the civic space. And for me, I would think that a disease has signs and symptoms. When you treat signs and symptoms, you're not treating the major disease that is under. And to me, I would disagree by saying that it is not the main thing we can do to improve our civic space. When we look at humanity and rule of law, and then you bring in judicial system, when we see that all these that are happening, the civic space shut down, it is from the topmost leader, the president, who is the commander-in-chief. So it means what we should do is electing leaders that love to serve, that love their people, that have the humanic heart, and not looking at their love to power. Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to restrict to 2 minutes so that we can have many people speak. And then if we pick one person from Bugema, we shall first speak. If there is any other person from another university, then we can always come back.
Our panelists, you can note the questions down, the ones that have been directed to you. You'll respond later.
So you begin by mentioning your name and your university, then use 2 minutes strictly.
Okay, thank you so much. My name is Carl Kulexpedito from Kampala University. The issue, I wanted just to inform the gentleman from Uganda University by telling him that Uganda University is a private entity institution. So it has all the rights, and we have no possession to tell them either to bring in the guild president who is not an Adventist. They have their rules that they follow. So that's why it is an entity. The government knows it out, and there's nothing to do with that, so that one is done. Again, on your point of how does the sharing civic space in Uganda affect students, I never had any big point, but me, what I was only, and where I would have given you credit is, you would have talked about the unhealthy democracy, and no strong justice, and inappropriate fulfillment of the roles. By saying that, some, as how we do selection, that maybe an Adventist, when you bring him, he may not fulfill that, but you never gave out that. So you have no credit there. Then on the issue of civic competence, how does the disadvantageous form of it? I was expecting these people, to the panel, to come out with the major issue of denial for freedom, whereby you have freedom of association, freedom of assembly, and freedom of expression. I'm so disappointed with the panel, only that he's Mr. Ndaga Farouk who tried to come out with elaboration about it, and Oscar tried. Because when we talk about the freedom of expression, I would give an example that we are totally different in that way. Look now at, like, for example, when we are going to have the elections, these elections that have passed, all social medias were closed, so we never accessed information, and it is against freedom of expression. So Ugandan students are so disadvantageous than other students from other countries. I submit.
Just to be sure, are you from the same university as Farouk? And you're not a judge? Okay.
Thank you. I might even use less than the 2 minutes that have been given. Praise Anna Tsingwize is my name from Kabbalah University. And I will do more of maybe clarification from Honorable from Bugema University. I missed out on what he said about when the NGOs were, maybe when they were starting in the early years that you talked about the universities. I don't know if about the NGOs. I don't know if you still remember, or if I quoted you wrong. There is something you talked about in the 19th about the NGOs that I missed out, and I want to know about it. Did you? Yes, then I would want to talk about what Mr. Farouk said about the shrinking space and said it is closing. I don't know if I disagree with you, or if I just have a different view of it. It is shrinking, and I think it is not really closing, because it is only in a few areas that we cannot talk about, but we have the other areas that we can. I won't say we are the worst country that have the worst shrinking, that have the worst civic space. We have the civic space, though it is not to the standards. Thank you.
Name and university.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Ebise Emiru from Akere University. So I want to first answer this question, that in the global context, how disadvantaged are Ugandan students in terms of their competence to participate in civic space? So first of all, we need to ask ourselves, firstly, it's important for us to look at the state of universities first as marketplaces for ideas. Do we actually have marketplaces of ideas? Now we need to look at the students who are in these universities. First of all, we are coming from a system, A-level, O-level, from a system that teaches us this is what, for example, in history, this is what a principle is. We do not question our lecturers, we do not question our teachers, and then we go into, we do not appreciate debate more. And this is something that Brett Stevens in his article in the New York Times calls the dying art of disagreement. And that is, for me, I think it's very fundamental in Ugandan universities, that the marketplace of ideas does not exist because we do not have, first of all, that the appreciation for debate, the appreciation for opinions that are diverse and are not part of us. So we need to cultivate the idea of critical thinking. We need to cultivate the idea of students reading, participating in research, and that's the only way we're going to have a population that is what I'd call woke in a serious way to impact society. Next, it's also important for us to look at the context within which the civil societies are operating. They're operating in a context where arrests are made in broad daylight of high-ranking government officials. We have parading of military in what should be a peaceful election. Germany recently held this election on Sunday, very peaceful. We actually had other events going on there. We have military being paraded, a total shutdown of internet, a space where in the 21st century we're exchanging opinions. Now, how do you expect students who are looking at this society that civil society is operating in to actually voice their opinions? And lastly, the thing that I want to talk about is that if you're talking about having a policeman here, with due respect, if we're talking about us having these conversations here, just one last thing. If we're talking about having this conversation here, when we have people saying, I will withhold the name because I do not want a drone to pick me up, is that actual engagement? Is that a civil society that would be impactful? Thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you. Do we have room for more questions? Okay. So different people from the very universities can ask. Do you have a question? Okay.
Thank you so much. My name is Baluku Derek, and I'm from Makerere University. So I want to just say one thing. The other time I was with Dr. Livingston Sewanyana, and he was telling us about where he did his master's in South Africa. So he told us that at his university, where I did his master's from, there anyone could literally breathe freedom. Like, people were so free to do anything that they wanted, and that could actually manifest through innovations and inventions. And you can actually see that South Africa is one of the countries that are producing maybe the best academicians and everything. So just to say that the shrinking civic space in Uganda is, let's say, curtailed by so many things. That's the state, the police. I'll say one thing. George Orwell said that if liberty means anything, it means the freedom for someone to say for someone to say anything that people don't want to hear. So one time at Makerere University, we are going to have a meeting of distinguished people to address students and especially female students, to teach them and tell them. But then at that meeting, as it was going to just start, we saw police just coming in and then stopping the meeting and telling people that you're not supposed to have this meeting. So really that has very, very implications, very bad implications.
Thank you, sir. Do you have a question? Okay. You mention your name, your university, you come down, then you ask.
Thank you so much. My name is Francis Semogerere. I'm a student of Kampala University. So mine is not a question, but I would just love the house to hear about the remaining points on the question that was asked, that how does the shrinking civic space affect students in participation in university and national issues? So I would like to give like 3 points just for the interest of time. First of all, it has led to brain drain. When I talk of brain drain, I mean people shifting from Uganda or from their mother country to the outside or foreign countries in order to look for better paying jobs or for something to earn a living. When I talk about that, I can give an example. of an activist, that is Fred Lumbuye. I don't know whether most of you know about him. He had very good skills in cooking, so he can be a good person. He can be a good chef. But just because this country, it has no freedom, it gives no freedom of expression, the man had to shift from here up to Turkey in order to start criticizing the government. So that is one. I'm continuing. The next thing, it also limits innovation. When I talk about innovation, you can ask, what do I mean? So last time I gave an example to some people that Google we are using, ask Mr. Google, ask Mr. Google, it was started by the Americans, I think you know them. So those people, they were university students who were carrying out research. They were carrying out research about how witchcraft can operate in modern technology. So what they did, they had to go and make research in Nigeria, because by that time it was the leading country in witchcraft. So they went there in order to make witchcraft modern. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's rather interesting. So we're taking 2 more questions. University? Yeah? Kabari. Okay, let's begin with you.
Thank you so much, moderator. The choosing civic space and its impact on universities as marketplaces for ideas. My name is Godwin Anobsinja from Kawa University. Tonight, we realize that the space is shrinking, and the major, actually, according to my analysis, the major point is government intervention in everything we are doing. And we come to realize that every other point is rotating to it, and we are failing to see how we can do it. For example, people are saying we are going to engage the population. And at the back of my mind, I'm asking myself, how are we going to engage the population, and yet the government cannot give us room for that? That's why we came to tell you that however much we have other platforms on where or about what we can, from which we can express our ideas, still they are still being stopped, for example, or online. That's how we brought up an idea of tax that is put online, only to stop people not to afford online. But my point, my major encouragement to the youth of Uganda is we are not yet too bad, but we can come up and still defend. Why? It is a community engagement for all of us. However much we may not get all the platforms to use, but if we tell a friend to tell a friend, then you can still come out to the maximum and enjoy the rights we should deserve. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, sir. So we are going to have the last question from the audience coming from this gentleman from Bugema University.
Well, thank you so much. My name is Robert Mugisha from Bugema University, as introduced. Well, I want to first of all thank all of you ladies and gentlemen for your contributions, submissions, and opinions. I'm not in a position to judge one's opinion as to whether it is wrong or right, because it is subject to discussion. But in the many submissions that you made, you have attributed the contribution to either governing bodies or some existing associations and other movements. But I've noticed that there is one thing that we have left out, and that is the contribution of an individual. Because you as an individual, you hold the biggest responsibility. Why? You're the very person to constitute of society. You're the very person who will go in the governance. You're the very person who is going to be either a subject or a practitioner in a civil society organization. And so therefore, my submission would be that if we collectively as individuals understood the space of civics, it would create a bigger impact and change that we would love to see in a better Africa, in a better world. And as they have been discussing, I would say that there is an art in which the space seems to be shrinking, as we have been hearing from our panelists. But the space that still exists, that is being manifested by even our existence here, shows that we are still having it. Regardless, I would still say that where we find limited engagement, obstructed action, and to some extent closing, we cannot hesitate to rebuke the art of shrinkage. Therefore, if that happens, what should we do? Do we also think, this is a question that I'm posing to your minds, could this shrinkage, could this limited engagement, obstructed action, or to some extent the total closure be brought by our collective actions? Could it be that sometimes we are taking the would-be, I beg for 1 minute to submit, since it's the last one, thank you. Could it be that we as the subject, sometimes we use arrogance in the asking for our rights? Could it be that we do not take the initiative to understand what our rights are? Could it be true that we are also not ready to take up these solutions to bring what we want, and we just surrender and put our hands up and say, Uganda is finished and done, we have nothing to do about it? Therefore, my submission is, let us put our collective effort. My brother said that Bugema has nothing to do about it. That is a matter of policy. We could sit with stakeholders and change about it. You can't say that it is done, it cannot be changed. It is a policy and it is made by people, and it can be affiliated with the National Council of Higher Education. Thank you so much. I beg to submit that it is our collective effort. Thank you.
It is our collective effort. Thank you very much. Thank you, the panelists. I'm happy that at least one person asked from each of the universities. Now, I'll move back to my sister, who is going to call upon the panelists to make their final submissions and conclusion.
Our dear audience, for your contribution. I know there are a number of questions on Twitter. Please feel free to go on Twitter and respond to those questions. Audience, go on Twitter, respond to the questions that have been directed to your universities. Go and tweet, as earlier stated, the hashtag is Inter-University Debates and hashtag Civic Space TV. Our panelists are going to have 2 minutes each. And please respond to the questions that were asked in the 2 minutes. I'm going to start right from Bugema University, Mr. Serumaga Badru. Thank you.
I'm overwhelmed by the chance that I always start first. Surely, I'll begin by putting up some comment about, indeed it was not a question, but he wanted maybe some enlightenment about it, because he said, Bugema University is a private institution. Little did government-owned parastatals and entities. About my sister's issue on the origin of NGOs, actually, I won't put so much of the burden on me. I didn't exist during this time. But to my knowing, it was after control ran out of the government that more people were called in to involve in participation and decision making, that this word had to arrive. In fact, a proper word could be community-based organizations. But because they are not owned by the government, that's why this name arose up, non-government organizations. The years it ranged years back, 60s, 50s, 30s, it depends on which environment these attempts were made. Thank you.
Mr. Badru, you always speak first because universities are arranged in alphabetical order. So Bugema University comes first. So we are going to have the closing remarks from Mr. Amanya Oscar, representing Kabale University. After the closing remarks, we are going to have our judges give remarks and then final announcement of results. We would like to know which of these 4 universities will make it to the semi-final. I welcome Mr. Amanya Oscar.
Thank you, Moderator. I'll first go to the question raised to me about, was it wrong to close the NGOs? Basically, that is a question that will be answered. I hope the one timing noticed that. Thank you. I'm saying, I was answering the question of my colleague about why, do I think that the closure of NGOs was wrong? And I said, since we have already been informed that there is a case being prepared, I should not do the constitutional role. But in my opinion, I think it was wrong. Recently, I was reading an article in DW News about the closure of these CSOs, and one of them is Chapter 4 Uganda. One of the reasons was that they didn't file returns, and yet the founder, who is lawyer Nicolas Opio, had posted a verified receipt on his verified Twitter account with the stamp of the government. So basically, it means there is something fishy. We shall leave that to the court to decide. Thank you. Then I would like to disclaim that Kampala University is a public university. My friend said he's not sure, so I want to make clear that Kampala University is a public university and a chartered one. Then I would like to go straight to the point of my brother about the shrinkage being an individual. The individuals are maybe part of the contribution of why the space is shrinking. But for us, we say, as Team Kampala University, that there is a lot of state intervention. An individual cannot do anything when his or her hands are tied. Just like the same goes to the question raised by Mr. Mayanja, that the impact of the civil society organization. But right now, if you are seated here, we can see that CCG has an impact. But if it is closed, then automatically the impact will not be seen. With those, I beg to submit. Thank you, dear panelists. Thank you, moderators. And thank you, judges.
Thank you. Let's have the closing remarks from Mr. Ndaga Farouk of Kampala University.
Thank you, Madam Moderator. I was challenged by my little sister from Kabale as to when she said that according to her own opinion, the shrinking space is not shrinking, but rather it is just shrinking but not closing. So I wish to give you a clarification. With the closure of the 54 NGOs like SEDU, Chapter 4, the Public Policy Institute, and so many others, with the introduction of the Public Management Act, with the introduction of Computer Misuse Act, with the 2016 NGO Act, this all hints on the shrinking civic space. However, why have I termed it to be a closing civic space? It's simply because if I compare the two situations where we were coming from as the Ugandan citizens towards civic space, and then regarding the current status quo, then I term that, when I compare, to be a closing space, not a shrinking civic space. Secondly, from Makelele, that how does the shrinking civic space affect the universities? First of all, we should know, dear moderator, we as the university students, if I'm studying law, where should I be practicing law? If I'm studying political science, where should I be practicing my political science? To give you a clear example, at Kampala University, we are not meant to practice partisan politics. Yet we are studying political science and public administration. There is no article where we are limited to start up a business in case you study BBA, business administration. So for me, in my own perception, I would wish to say that we should be practicing what we are meant to, what we are where we are becoming professionals from. So the universities are being affected from there because it is nurturing people who are not professionals. So with those few remarks, I wish to conclude. Thank you so much.
But not least, we are going to have Mr. Mayanja Benson from Makerere University.
Okay. Thank you very much. I'm going to just start by responding to the question that came from my brother from Uganda University, and then I'll leave you with the three things that Team Makerere is trying to advance to this house and to everyone who is watching. So firstly, your question was on how exactly is the court in play, yet, you know, the most important thing is government intervention. And I really agree with the statement that you made, that you don't know much law, but you're asking these questions. And that's exactly what we are saying. That because you can actually be affected by something that you have not really addressed your mind to, is where the problem is. And that's why we are having a very small critical thinking space, as my colleague Ebise was saying. So let me give you a good example. When the government wanted to import Cuban doctors, I believe you want to practice in the field of medicine. One fundamental right was being infringed. Imagine if the Uganda National Medical Workers Association was stopped from holding a rally, was stopped from having press conferences, was stopped from doing all those things. What essentially it would be doing would be to clamp down on the rights of medical workers to practice their profession, which is a violation of very many rights. So at the end of the day, the only way how you can get justice or redress for most of those violations is by going to court, like constitutional governance for good governance is going to do. So that's why it's very important to have that last safeguard. All my colleagues have spoken about violations left and right, but the only way how you can actually rectify those challenges is by going to court, because that's how the system works. And that's essentially what Tim McCary is saying. We are saying that when we go to university, it's not just about learning prognosis, about symptoms and all this anatomy. It's not really about that. It's about having a critical learning environment where you can have a diversity, a multiplicity of knowledge, such that whenever your rights are violated, you don't just say, I'm a medical student, I don't know that. That's what civic space is about, and that's why we are saying that as Tim McCary, there are three things that we need to remember. Firstly, that the clampdown on civic space is not about to stop, because those are the tools that are used by, like authoritarian governments. And just with this last statement is that if we want to change and have critical thinkers, we need to take a human rights-based approach to education. A system that enables us to teach not just what is on the syllabi, and that's something that's different from all what the other universities are saying. We really need to take this on, and with a shrinking civic space, that is in the limelight. That is something that we really need to take a lot of concern on. So I know this has been a debate, but I've really enjoyed the fact that we've had honest conversation about some of these pertinent issues, and I'm very glad that we've spared time to do this. Thank you very much, and all the best. Have a good evening.
Our dear panelists, you've all been impressive, and you may clap for yourselves, and these guys may clap for you. So we've come to the tail end of today's discussion. We don't have much time left. So we are going to have 2 or 3 items, and when those are done, we shall move and call this a day. So the first is going to be the remarks from the judges. We are going to have the judges give their remarks, and once that is done, the final judge will also announce the winner, as he does that. So we are going to begin with Judge Akiteng Isabella. Yes, Judge Akiteng Isabella is going to give her remarks of today's discussion and tell us her views on what she thinks of your submissions that I think have been impressive personally.
Thank you very much, Godwin, and a good evening to you all. Do I really have to start? No, I'll be taller than the... So good evening to you all. My name is Isabella Akiteng, and I'm honored to have been part of the panel. In regard to comments, one of the comments is that if this had been an actual BP debate, I am a BP debater. I also train, so I love debate. If this was a BP debate, the win would have gone to the audience, you know? So thank you to the audience for having done your work, and yes, for being so articulate. In regard to general comments, one of the comments is that if we are having a panel debate like this, which was a beautiful conversation, I don't think anyone on the panel dozed off, so we enjoyed every bit of the conversation. But in debates where you have limited time, it's important that you don't have winding conversations. So go straight to the point and deal with the issue as it comes. The other one is don't make assumptions. So if you're talking about legislative details, give us the detail. We are more interested in the detail than in the overarching line or argument that we blanket in the name of legislative issues. Also, in terms of questioning, as a judge, I would like to commend Kabale University for being amazing with your questioning technique. One of the things that we always undermine is the ability to ask questions. But the power of asking questions is actually more important than the art of responding to them. So thank you very much for being very articulate in your responses. The other one that I would like to commend in terms of this debate is the gift of alternative definitions, which was given by Makere, especially the alternative definition around shrinking civic space, where you talked about an environment of hope, which is not a definition that we usually use, especially in civil society. But I think it's one of those definitions that we need to begin to embrace, even as we talk about this context. In regard to content, one of the things that I say is read widely. You've been home for 2 years. It shows. Yes, it's very clear that you've been home for 2 years. You have access to the internet. You have access to a lot of information. Don't stop learning simply because you're not at school. So read widely, read newspapers, read blogs, there's a lot of information out there. When they talked about how students can learn, or the difference between Ugandan students and the rest of the world, I thought you would talk about fees should fall. You know, looking at the South African context and the Ugandan context. I thought you'd talk about how different chancellors respond to crises, how Nawangwe responds to a crisis, and how vice chancellors in South Africa responded to fees must fall. And so read. Let knowledge be your friend, and it will definitely not show in the event that schools are not open for the next 2 years. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Isabella. We shall have this. Okay. Have you guys noted that? Have you? But the ladies decide. All right. Send women. So we are going to have the next judge, and that is Mr. Michael Aboneka. He is an advocate of the High. He said all courts of judicature. That includes, for those that don't know the law so much, the Supreme Court and the East African Court, right? And the court martial. He is a partner at Thomas and Michael Advocates. He also works with Action Aid as a coordinator of Civic Spaces. So he's going to make his comments and his observations. Then we shall move to the final judge, who will also announce the winners. Mr. Michael, the floor is yours.
Thank you. It seems all the colored microphones have problems. There is a problem with colors in this country. And I've been telling people, please let us not demonize colors. Let us enjoy our colors. Even now, all the fingers are taken. But these are our fingers. Thank you so much. I want to thank all the debaters. Please let us appreciate them. It's not easy to be here. I want to say that I am a debater. How many of you know British parliamentary format debate? Very good. The first time I traveled out of the country, I was carrying the flag to represent Uganda at the Pan-African University Debate Championship in Harare. So, we reached quarterfinals. We tried. So I love debate, and Sarah and CCG and colleagues, debate is the thing because it helps us to discuss many things. So I want to appreciate. I enjoyed the debate, and is it Farouk? I was wondering, you use indulgence, state, involvement several times, and I was wondering, what exactly did you mean, by state indulgence? It is important for us to break it down, but I enjoyed the debate. So quickly, we're talking about civic space. There was a lot of generalities. You guys, I think, are philosophers. But in debate, you have to keep it simple, snappy, and to the point. And of course, closing opposition is my best, in debate. So if I'm to look at clashes, there are quite a number of them. And one of them is closing versus shrinking. Which one is it? Are we having space closed? Or are we having space shrinking? And Farouk made a very good statement, which threw a lot of us in debate. And that's good for debate. And you may never have the correct answer. But so the panelists, the debaters, please avoid generalities. When you say that, as I've told you above, the space is shrinking, I want to repeat it is shrinking. It has shrunk. And you spend all the minutes in telling me how it has shrunk without telling me the how. Then that also becomes a problem because we need now specifics. Others have tried. It is closing because of the state interference and things like that. The other one is about yes, there was a lot of theory, which is good, but I was waiting for examples, specifics. Then the other thing, when we talk about civic space, it's not just about organizations. I saw the debate was so much on NGOs, so much on organizations, than the individuals. Can any of you go to City Square? Can any of you exercise? So it's about not just NGOs, but about all of us here. How is space shrinking affecting us? So I felt that the debate was more about NGOs, and if there is someone online watching and they don't want anything about NGOs, they will be bored. The other issue, before I leave the floor, is in debates, you need to be mindful of the time. It's like driving. When you're driving, you are driving 3 cars. The one you're driving, the one ahead of you, and the one behind you, and now the border borders on the side. So you're driving actually 5 vehicles in this town. So when you are giving you need to be courteous. When you're giving way, you don't just say, obadogambachi. I think that's what it meant in Uganda. You tell us. We need to be courteous. Debate is about how courteous you are, how elaborate you are. So let's be courteous and avoid those issues. Then we have to be smart. Let's clap for those that you think are smart. You have to keep smart. And I want to tell you there were marks for that. Okay? I came from UCU and we never went for debate. They knew us as the suit guys. But we bought our suits for debate because we understood that you have to be smart and appeal to the judge, And now I'm practicing law and I must appear. So that I'm appealing even before I say anything. So it is important we keep that. The other point is about in general, is that I loved to hear more of specifics, examples. but it was lost in so much philosophical arguments, which are good for writing a dissertation because it has introduction, background, and etc. But debate, you have 3 minutes. What is civic space? And I think my colleague from Kabale set that tone. The debate came back of civic space is this. When you don't have civic space, this is what happens. Because you have few minutes and you need to hit the nail. Lastly, is I love the comment. Let me now talk about the audience. Thank you for participating. Someone made a comment about critical thinking. Critical thinking. I love that. Because civic space is about ability for you to think. Do we have spaces for thinking? Why don't we have political education anymore? Why don't we have civics taught anymore? These are questions for us to talk about. And in university, what do we have as the equivalent to that? So I am an activist. I may turn this podium into another platform, but I don't want to do that. But to say, I enjoyed the debate, and for me, the major clash has been, is space closed or is it shrinking? That was a major clash of this debate. I want to thank you.
Thank you very much, Council Michael Aboneka. Now, finally, we are going to have the chairperson of the judges, and that is Mr. Luke, ASP, Luke Owesigire. He is the Kampala Metropolitan Police Deputy Spokesperson, and in this time of Ngamba Nogu, you may want to have a selfie with him, you never know, where you can present that. So, Mr. Luke Owesigire is going to make his remarks, and then also announce the winner.
Good evening, everyone. I practically don't know why I was made chairman. I think it was consensus, but no. Okay, I will take it on. I wouldn't mind taking it on. First and foremost, I really enjoyed the debate. It was, I would say, my first time to be to be a judge. The other debates we attended in school, I would just be a person contributing to it, a backbencher. But it is a very good thing. It has awakened my spirit. One of the things that I've liked about today is that all the panelists have put in their feelings in this debate. They are not only talking about things that are affecting, that we are discussing, but these are things that are out there affecting them as people, things that are actually affecting many of us in the country. So thank you very much. There was, of course, I would want to say that the heat of the conversation, of course, I liked how Kabale really asked questions and how Kabale responded to them. And also, I would say, also Makerere responding to some of the questions that were asked, and also giving us resolutions, what they are planning as a university. And if all of you, I don't know which course you're doing, if all of you have that mindset that this is what we are planning to do, looking for solutions, because I think that was also part of the things that we were looking at. If a panelist is out there talking, are they giving solutions to what we are discussing about? Or is there no hope, like our friend here from Kampala University who say there is no hope? The only hope is to remove the government. So I think we need to be hopeful, like many of us have really put it out there. I want to thank all those that have actually come to be part of us. We are one of the highlights also of the day is someone pointing me out that I'm part of you. It is also not an easy thing to find. Of course, someone downgraded it that our friend from Makerere couldn't say the name of the person when he was quoting some statements. But I think that is something, a personal issue. There are people who feel it's easy to quote people, and then there are those, because maybe how he's brought up, he will not feel okay to quote anyone if he's mentioning something about them. So overall, the debate was good. The judges have said most of the things. Outstanding. Her last comment, we didn't have a lady, and those are some of the things that the international community looks out for. I think this is something that is on a space. People are really
watching this, and I think we should do something about it. I don't know whether these are the people that will come in the semi-finals or you will change a bit, I don't know. But I think it will go on until the finals, the faces that have been presented here. Nevertheless, all of you did a good job. And I think we can go on to the next item. I really enjoyed myself. I think whoever was watching from home really enjoyed themselves. We can go on to the next item. We'll wait for you to you need to announce it, or I need, or no, I mean, does he need to introduce it, or I can continue?
Well, after the announcements, there's a lot of excitement.
Hey.
So I would rather we come last with that.
Okay.
So what I'm going to do is I'm going to invite Damian from CCG, and on behalf of CCG, to close. Then he will come and make the announcement, such that people will celebrate and cry, will at least listen to you before that can happen. So Damian, can we give a round of applause to the team at CCG? CCG is the Center for Constitutional Governance, and I know that most of you have been there. They are just located across the other side. They engage a lot in such kind of discussions. Sarah didn't mention that, but I was also a debater during the university debates when I was at Makerere Law School. And now we are here. We thank God that God has kept them and they are continuing to move on. That even when some NGOs are closed, they are not closed. We pray that it keeps like that, and we wish them all the best. Over to you, Damian. Then Luke will come and announce the winners.
Thank you very much, Toko, and also Gender, our moderators for today. Of course, and our timekeeper somewhere, Matanda. You've done a very commendable job today, but he's also a moderator who has been, these three have been the lead moderators for these conversations from when we started until today. But this is not the end. I'm sure the judges have done the best to award. And of course, as you see, we don't expect that people will petition. It is as free, and the whole world will see the outcome of the conversations. But what I wanted to note out, and also to let you know that the conversation, we are starting with the next group that will run from next week, the second group, and we'll meet again at the end of the month. And we'll ensure, from the moderators, we'll ensure that we have participation of the ladies as much as possible. And the universities out there that are watching us, that are preparing for these conversations, starting next week, please have this gender consideration. And maybe that will also be another area we shall give you a mark or two. So you need to make this happen. And maybe, I don't know if there's any communication that we need to do apart from that. I need to inform the other universities that are out there that the conversations are still ongoing. We are still running this program for the next at least 6 months until we award the final winner. And from then we shall roll out again. But the other universities out there that are watching us, please prepare. It is as engaging as it is and exciting. Please be part of the conversations. Hashtag inter-university debates. It is what it is. Matanda likes saying, he likes saying that it is a free space. Civic space is as free as it is. You speak your mind. Thank you very much. I think I will need to invite Afande back on to award. You can prepare your excitement, and we shall wipe your tears also, just in case.
Good evening once again. This was a debate, like you all know, and the debaters included from Bugema University, we had Serumaga Badru. From Kabale, we had was represented by Mr. Amanya Oscar. Kampala University was represented by Mr. Daga Farouk. And Makerere University was represented by Mr. Mayanja Benson. And some of the things that we were giving marks, that we were considering in giving marks was the content. We were considering the relevancy, ability to make realistic analysis, and how to propose relevant policies, the composure of the person, and calmness when responding to questions, the confidence and public speaking skills, which I think most of you were really good at, the general appearance and the smartness of the participant. So I had, I was, my neighbor is a debater. He had advised me on how I should announce, but now I'm told I should only give only the first and the second. The second, should I go with my initial plan or I should go with a new plan? Initial plan, okay. So they told me to come from the bottom so that I create some tension in the room. Yeah? That I create some tension. The person took number 4 is Kampala University, Panelist, and Daga Farouk. Scored a percentage of 58%. And number 3 was Panelist Serumaga Badru from Bugema University. Are we feeding the tension or? Oh, we need some music. Yeah? We need some music. So, Panelist number 2, and of course, if I give number 2, number 1 knows themselves, obviously. Panelist number 2, that is Kabali. Panelist Amanya Oscar scored 82%. And of course, number 1 is Makerere, represented by Mayanja Benson. Can, in police or in the forces, when you want to clap, one person comes out and says, Asante sana, then you clap. Pa, 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 pa. Let's do it again. Asante sana. Thank you very much, Mayanja, and all the panelists that have participated in this. Whatever happens from today, I'm not very much aware. Whether they are giving you gifts or mobile money, I don't know. I don't know what one of the things we are supposed to do is not to present gifts. So I think ours is done. Thank you very much for participating.
This table and our panelists, you're going to take pictures. So please.
In 1 month, in 1 week, you will sing a new song in 2 days.
From us, we say thank you. Thank you to the audience, to the panelists, to those who have been watching. To those who have been watching us on Civic Space TV, we say thank you. Thank you to the CCG team. Thank you.
Also, thank you to those that have been tweeting, Facebooking, and posting about this engagement. It has been very engaging on social media, and we are grateful that you did that.
Congratulations. See what the Lord has done for you. Congratulations. God is good. Them say that I can never be all that I see. I've seen that God is greater than that. Who can battle with the Lord? Nobody. Who can change his mind about me? For many years, in many ways, I have seen his faithfulness ever and ever. Yeah. anytime, anywhere. Dancing like oh, we go dance oh, yeah. Turn up, oh. Just take all them up here to the movie go. Rock off your back with a wicked style. On to the dance floor, a wicked style. Wiggy, 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 wagga, wagga, squeeze me, baby, the heavy, wagga.